The copper pot made a sound like thunder when it connected with Deputy Frank Carson's skull. Rose Matthews stood in the middle of Main Street, Pine Ridge, Montana, her hands still gripping the handles of her mother's cooking pot. Blood sprayed across her torn dress. The deputy crumpled to the dirt like a fallen tree, his eyes rolled back white. His body twitched once, then went still. Behind Rose, 4 children screamed. The littlest one, Annie, only 3 years old, buried her face in her brother's shoulder. Grace, 8, covered her mouth with both hands. Danny, 10, stepped forward like he wanted to fight, but his legs wouldn't move. And Benji, 5 years old, just stared with empty eyes that had stopped seeing the world 6 months ago. Sheriff Thaddeus Walsh drew his pistol. The sound of the hammer cocking cut through the morning air like a blade. His hand shook. Not from fear, from rage. "You killed a lawman girl." Rose didn't lower the pot, didn't step back. Blood dripped from the copper rim onto the dust between them. Her chest heaved, her arms trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on the sheriff's gun. "He ain't dead," she said. Her voice came out steady, cold. Nothing like a 12-year-old girl should sound. "But he will be if you don't let us go." The street had gone silent. Shopkeepers stood frozen in doorways. Women pulled their children inside. Men put hands on pistols they weren't sure they'd use. Everyone in Pine Ridge knew Sheriff Walsh. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed him. That's when Jake Brennan rode into town. He'd come for feed corn. Nothing more. Just another October morning at the tail end of 1889, 7 years into a life that had stopped meaning anything the day his wife died. His horse, a gray gelding named Stormclip, clopped down Main Street at an easy walk. Jake sat tall in the saddle despite the weight he carried in his chest. 42 years old, 6'3", shoulders broad as a barn door. Hands scarred from 20 years of ranch work and 4 years of war before that. He saw the crowd first, then the girl with the pot, then the deputy bleeding in the dirt, then Walsh with his gun drawn and his face twisted into something ugly. Jake dismounted before Storm came to a full stop. His boots hit the ground hard. The spurs made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. He walked toward the scene with the measured pace of a man who'd walked toward death before and learned it wasn't something to rush. "Lower your weapon, Walsh." The sheriff's head snapped around. His eyes went wide for just a moment when he recognized Jake Brennan. Then they narrowed again, harder than before. "Stay out of this, Brennan. These are fugitives." Jake stopped between the sheriff and the girl. He didn't draw his own pistol. Didn't need to. Everyone in 3 counties knew Jake Brennan could outdraw Walsh with his eyes closed and one hand tied. War had taught him things men learned in peacetime couldn't match. "I see 5 terrified children," Jake said. His voice came out low, quiet, the kind of quiet that made smart men listen. "Not fugitives." Walsh's gun hand steadied. He held up a folded paper with his other hand, official-looking, stamped with a seal. "Judge Morrison's order. These orphans are wards of the state. They're coming with me." Jake looked at the girl for the first time. Really looked. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. Her dress had been mended so many times the patches had patches. Her face was smudged with dirt and tear tracks. But her jaw was set like iron. Her knuckles were white on that copper pot. And her eyes held something Jake recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 7 years. The look of someone who'd lost everything and decided they'd rather die than lose anything more. The girl's lips moved, barely a whisper, but Jake heard it. "He's going to separate us, send us to different places." Something shifted in Jake's chest, something that had been dead and cold since Sarah's last breath rattled out in the spring of 1882, since Emma's fever broke the wrong way 2 months later and took the last light out of his world. He looked at the 4 children behind the girl, the boy trying to be brave, the girl covering her mouth, the little one crying, and the small boy with the empty eyes who stood apart from the others like he'd already left this world behind. That last one hit Jake like a fist to the gut, those eyes. Dead. Hollow. Gone. Emma's eyes had looked like that in the final days. Jake made his decision. "Put the children in my wagon," he said. Not loud, not angry, just final. The way a man speaks when he's done deliberating and started acting. "Now," Walsh's face went purple, "you're obstructing justice. Sue me." Jake turned his back on the sheriff, turned his back on a loaded gun. "I'll see you in court." He walked to the children, knelt down in front of the girl with the pot. Up close, he could see she was shaking, fighting not to show it, fighting to stay strong for the others, fighting a battle no 12-year-old should have to fight alone. "What's your name?" Jake asked. "Rose Matthews." "I'm Jake Brennan. I have a ranch about 10 miles north. You and your family can come with me, but we need to leave now. Can you do that?" Rose looked at him with eyes that had learned not to trust, had learned that every adult eventually left or lied or hurt. But desperation beat caution. She nodded. "Into the wagon," Jake said to all of them. "Quick and quiet." The children moved. Danny helped Annie up first. Grace climbed in after. Rose started to follow, but Jake stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The pot," he said. "You can bring it." Something in Rose's face cracked, just for a second. Then she climbed into the wagon bed and pulled her siblings close. Jake climbed onto the driver's bench, picked up the reins. Behind him, Walsh was shouting something about the law and consequences and how this wouldn't stand. Jake didn't listen. He clicked his tongue. The wagon rolled forward. They rode out of Pine Ridge with the morning sun climbing over the mountains and Sheriff Walsh's curses following them like smoke. Nobody spoke for the first mile. The only sounds were the creak of wagon wheels and the jingle of harness and the wind moving through the pines. Jake kept his eyes forward, kept the horses at a steady pace, fast enough to put distance between them and town, slow enough not to spook the children more than they already were. It was Rose who finally broke the silence. "Why did you help us?" Jake didn't answer right away. How could he explain that he'd seen death in a little boy's eyes and it had reached through 7 years of grief and grabbed him by the throat? How could he tell this girl that for the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he'd felt something besides emptiness? "Because you needed help," he said finally, "and I was there. Walsh won't let this go. He'll come for us. Let him try." Rose studied the back of Jake's head. This man was a stranger. She'd learned strangers were dangerous, but he'd stepped between her and a loaded gun. He'd given them a way out when there was no way out. "We'll work," Rose said. "For food and shelter. I can cook. Danny can do ranch work. We won't be a burden. Didn't ask you to work. We don't take charity." Jake turned slightly, looked back at her over his shoulder, saw pride mixed with fear, saw a child forced to be an adult far too soon. "Fair enough," he said. "We'll figure out the details when we get home." Home. The word hung in the air like a promise none of them believed yet. The wagon rolled on through country that had seen better days. The drought of '88 had hit Montana hard. Fields that should have been green lay brown and dead. Cattle in the distance looked thin. But as they climbed into the foothills, the grass improved. Pine trees thickened. A creek ran alongside the road, cold and clear from the mountains. Then they crested a ridge, and Timber Creek Ranch spread out below them. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. A main house built from logs cut in these very hills. Barns and outbuildings arranged like a small village. Corrals holding horses and a few cattle. Smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney where the ranch hands would be finishing breakfast. It looked like something out of a dream. Clean. Solid. Permanent. Rose felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. "That's all yours?" Danny asked. "That's all mine," Jake confirmed. They rolled down the slope toward the ranch. A man emerged from the barn as they approached. Tall, weathered. About 55, with gray shot through his dark hair and a face that had seen too much sun. He wore a faded cavalry hat and walked with a slight limp that spoke of old wounds. Marcus Webb, ranch foreman, friend since the war, the only person Jake had let close in 7 years. Marcus's eyes went wide when he saw the wagon bed full of children. "Boss," he said slowly. "What are you doing?" Jake climbed down, helped the children out one by one, set Annie on the ground, and watched her wobble on unsteady legs. Watched Danny stand protectively close to his sisters. Watched Grace clutch Benji's hand, even though the boy didn't seem to notice. "We have guests," Jake said. "Get them fed." "Jake?" Marcus moved closer, lowered his voice. "You said no children. You said never again after." He trailed off. Didn't need to finish. They both knew what came after that sentence. "I know what I said. I'm saying something different now." Marcus studied his friend's face. Saw something there he hadn't seen in 7 years. A spark. Small. Fragile. But alive. "All right then," Marcus said. He turned to the children with a smile that softened his hard features. "You kids hungry?" 4 heads nodded. Benji just stared. "Come on. Cookie made biscuits this morning. Let's get some food in you before you blow away." Marcus led 4 of the children toward the bunkhouse, but Rose stayed behind, stood facing Jake with that copper pot still gripped in both hands. "You said we'd figure out the details," she said. "So let's figure them out. What do you want from us?" Jake looked at this fierce little warrior, this girl who'd hit a lawman to protect her family and would probably do it again without hesitation. 1 week, he said. "You can stay 1 week. Prove you can work, you can stay permanent. And if we can't, then I'll find you somewhere safe. Somewhere that won't separate you." Rose weighed this, looking for the trap, the catch, the lie hidden behind kind words. But all she saw was a tired man with sad eyes who looked like he understood loss. "What kind of work?" she asked. "You said you can cook. We've got 17 ranch hands plus me and Marcus. That's 19 men who need 3 meals a day. Think you can handle that?" Rose's chin came up. "My mama was the best cook in 3 counties. She taught me everything she knew." "Then you're hired for a week. Danny can help Marcus with the horses and cattle. If Marcus says he's up to it, the others, they stay out of trouble and out of my way." Jake's voice went hard, flat. "I don't want to see them. Don't want to hear them. Don't want to be reminded they exist. They can have the rooms near the kitchen. They can eat. They can sleep. But they keep clear of me. Understood?" Rose heard the pain behind those words. Heard a man trying to protect himself from something that had already broken him once. "Understood," she said quietly. Jake nodded, started to walk toward the main house, then stopped, turned back. "What happened to your parents?" Rose's hand tightened on the pot. "Mama died. Fever. 6 months ago. Pa left 2 weeks after. Couldn't handle 5 kids alone." Her voice stayed level, but Jake heard the wound underneath. "He didn't even say goodbye. Just left a note saying he was sorry." Jake knew that kind of sorry, the useless kind, the kind that didn't change anything or fix anything or bring anyone back. And the boy who doesn't talk, Benji. He stopped the day Pa left. Doctor called it nervous shock, said his mind just shut down the part that makes words. Jake looked toward the bunkhouse where the children had disappeared. Thought about a little boy with dead eyes who'd lost his voice to grief. Thought about another little girl 7 years ago who'd stopped laughing before the fever took her completely. 1 week, he said again, then walked to the main house alone. Marcus found him an hour later, sitting at his desk in the study that had become his prison. Paperwork spread out in front of him. Work he didn't care about for a ranch he only kept running because stopping would mean admitting he had no reason to get up in the morning. "They're settled," Marcus said from the doorway. "Rose already started taking inventory of the kitchen. Girl's got her mama's gift if this afternoon's stew is any indication." Jake grunted, didn't look up. "Want to tell me what really happened in town?" "Girl hit Deputy Carson with a pot. Sheriff was going to separate them, send them to different places. Work farms, orphanages, the kind of places kids go into and don't come out of whole." "So you brought them here." "So I brought them here." Marcus limped into the room, sat in the chair across from Jake without being invited. 20 years of friendship bought certain privileges. "Jake, I know you think you can keep them at arm's length. Put them to work. Keep your distance. But those kids need more than food and shelter. They need—" "Don't." Jake's voice cut like a blade. "Don't tell me what they need. I gave them a chance. That's more than most would do. Sarah wouldn't have—" "Sarah's dead." Jake looked up finally. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Sarah's dead, and Emma's dead, and I'm what's left. This hollow thing that keeps breathing because it forgot how to stop. Those children can stay a week. They can work. But I can't be what they need. I can't be anyone's father, not anymore." Marcus stood, walked to the door, paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I saw something in your eyes today I haven't seen since '82, something that looked almost like hope." He left before Jake could respond. Jake sat alone as the afternoon light slanted through the window, sat with the ghosts that lived in this room and this house and every corner of this ranch. Sarah's laughter, Emma's small feet running through the halls, the life that had been stolen by sickness and fate and a God who didn't answer prayers. He picked up the photograph from his desk. Sarah on their wedding day. Dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that could light up the darkest Montana winter. 23 years old and so full of life, she seemed to glow. Gone at 28. Next to it, a smaller photograph. Emma at 5, missing her front teeth, holding a kitten she'd found in the barn and insisted on keeping. Her mother's eyes, her father's stubborn chin. Gone at 6. Jake traced their faces with a finger scarred from ranch work and old battles. His hand shook. "I can't do this again," he whispered to the empty room. "I can't love something and watch it die." But even as he said it, he remembered a little girl standing in the street with a copper pot, ready to die protecting her family, ready to fight the whole world with nothing but determination and her mother's cooking pan. He remembered empty eyes in a 5-year-old boy who'd lost his voice to grief, and he wondered if maybe, just maybe, healing worked both ways, if saving someone else might be the only way to save himself. Outside, the sun dropped toward the mountains. The ranch hands finished their day and headed to the bunkhouse for supper. Somewhere in the building, near the kitchen, 5 children settled into rooms that weren't home, but were better than hiding in abandoned barns. And in the study of the main house, a broken man sat alone with his ghosts and felt something shift in his chest, something small, something fragile, something that almost felt like the beginning of hope. Rose woke at 4 in the morning, not because anyone told her to, because that's what you did when 17 hungry men needed feeding and your family's survival depended on proving your worth. The kitchen was dark and cold when she slipped inside. October in Montana meant frost on the windows and breath that came out in clouds. She built a fire in the cast-iron stove with hands that knew the work. Had done it 1,000 times in her mother's kitchen back when life made sense and families stayed together. The flames caught. Light bloomed orange and warm. Rose stood for a moment, letting the heat reach her bones. Then she got to work. Flour from the pantry, salt, lard, baking powder measured by feel more than sight. Her hands moved through the motions her mother had taught her, kneading, rolling, cutting circles with an old tin cup, 50 biscuits arranged on baking sheets like soldiers in formation. Danny appeared in the doorway as the first batch went into the oven. 10 years old, but trying so hard to be a man. Hair sticking up on one side, eyes still heavy with sleep. "What can I do?" he asked. "Bacon, 2 pounds. Lay it flat in the big pan. Don't let the pieces overlap." He worked in silence beside her. Sister and brother, the only family they had left besides 3 younger children sleeping in rooms that weren't home, but were better than cold barns and empty grain silos. The bacon sizzled, the biscuits rose. Rose cracked 24 eggs into a bowl and whipped them with cream she'd found in the cold box. Added a pinch of pepper, a dash of salt, scrambled them in a pan with butter that smelled like childhood Sunday mornings. Then she made gravy. This was the test. Any fool could fry bacon and crack eggs. But gravy separated the women from the girls. Too thin and it was worthless. Too thick and it sat in your stomach like river stones. Rose poured bacon drippings into a pan, added flour, stirred until it turned golden brown. Then milk, slowly. Watching the color change from white to tan to that perfect shade her mother called liquid gold. She tasted it, adjusted the salt, added more pepper, tasted again. Perfect. The biscuits came out of the oven golden brown and steaming. Rose stared at them for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. She reached for the jar of honey on the top shelf. Wild honey, dark and thick, the kind that carried the taste of Montana wildflowers and summer sun. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. A little honey on a biscuit is like adding sunshine to bread. Rose drizzled honey over half the biscuits, let it pool in the centers and run down the sides. The sweet smell mixed with butter and bacon and fresh coffee brewing on the stove. Outside she heard boots on wooden planks, voices rough with mourning, the ranch hands coming for breakfast. The door opened. 17 men filed in, big men, weathered by sun and work. They saw the table laden with food and stopped like they'd hit a wall. "Well, hell," one of them muttered. They ate like starving wolves. Plates filled and emptied and filled again. Biscuits disappeared so fast, Rose barely had time to bring out fresh batches. The gravy bowl needed refilling twice, coffee pot 3 times. Marcus Webb sat at the head of the table, took a biscuit with honey, bit into it, his eyes closed. "Lord Almighty," he breathed. "Boys, you got to try this." The compliments came in rough voices not used to praise. "Best breakfast in 3 years? Better than my mama made." "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" Rose answered them all with quiet thank yous and kept the food coming. But she saved one plate special. The best biscuits, the crispiest bacon, eggs cooked just past soft, coffee in a clean cup. She arranged it all on a wooden tray and carried it toward the main house. Marcus caught her arm gently as she passed. "Boss eats alone," he said. "Has for 7 years, doesn't like company. He said I could stay if I proved I could work. Can't prove it if he doesn't taste the food." Marcus studied her, saw determination mixed with fear, saw a child trying to save her family the only way she knew how. His studies down the hall, 3rd door on the left, knock first. Rose walked through a house that smelled like dust and abandonment, past rooms with closed doors, past walls that should have held pictures but didn't, past a life that had stopped living 7 years ago and never started again. She knocked on the 3rd door. "What?" The voice from inside was rough, annoyed. "It's Rose, sir. I brought your breakfast." A long pause. Then, "Leave it outside." Rose hesitated. She should do what he said. Should set the tray down and walk away and count herself lucky he hadn't thrown them out already. But that wasn't how you won someone over. That wasn't how you made yourself indispensable. She opened the door. Jake sat behind a massive oak desk covered in papers and ledgers, and the evidence of a man who worked to avoid thinking. He looked up with a scowl that could curdle milk. "I said leave it outside." I heard you, sir. But hot food don't stay hot long, and cold biscuits ain't worth eating. She crossed the room before he could argue, set the tray on the edge of his desk. The morning sun slanted through the window and caught the honey on the biscuits, made it glow like liquid amber. Jake stared at the plate, then at her. You got a problem with authority, girl. No, sir. I got a problem with wasted food. For a moment, Rose thought she'd pushed too far. Jake's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists on the desk. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. You got nerve, I'll give you that. So I've been told. Rose turned to leave, made it 3 steps before Jake spoke again. Wait! She stopped, turned back. Jake picked up a biscuit, the one with the most honey, examined it like it might bite him, then took a small bite. He went completely still. The biscuit fell from his hand. His face lost all color. His breath caught in his chest like something had reached in and squeezed. This honey, he said slowly, voice cracking. You added honey. Yes, sir. My mama used to say it's like adding sunshine to bread. Jake's hands started shaking. He gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. That's what she used to say. The words came out barely above a whisper. That's exactly what Sarah used to say. Rose didn't understand. Didn't know who Sarah was, or why a simple biscuit with honey would break a grown man in half. She just knew she'd done something terrible without meaning to. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. Get out. The words cut like a blade. Sir, I said get out. Jake's voice cracked completely. He turned his face away. Leave the tray, just go. Rose went. Fled down the hall with her heart hammering and tears burning her eyes. Made it back to the kitchen before her legs gave out. Sank onto a stool while Danny watched with worried eyes. What happened? I don't know. I gave him breakfast and I don't know. In his study, Jake sat alone with a biscuit and a flood of memories he'd spent 7 years trying to drown. Sarah in their kitchen, 4 months pregnant with Emma, flour on her nose and that smile that could light up the darkest winter, making biscuits every Sunday morning without fail. Drizzling honey over the tops because she said it was like capturing sunshine. Emma at 5 years old, standing on a stool to help, getting more honey on herself than the biscuits, licking her fingers and laughing. It tastes like sunshine, Papa, just like Mama said. The last Sunday before Sarah got sick, before the cough that wouldn't stop, before the blood in her handkerchief, before the doctor's face that told Jake everything he needed to know without saying a word, before his world ended. Jake picked up the biscuit with shaking hands, took another bite. The honey was sweet on his tongue, bitter in his throat. He tried to swallow but couldn't pass the grief lodged there like a stone. The tears came before he could stop them. 7 years. 7 years he'd kept it locked down, kept it buried, kept working and breathing and existing, because stopping would mean admitting they were really gone. But a 12-year-old girl with her mother's recipe had reached through all that carefully constructed nothing and ripped him open. Jake cried for the first time since they'd lowered Sarah's coffin into the ground, cried for the wife who'd died too young, for the daughter who'd followed 2 months later, for 7 years of pretending he was fine when he was shattered into so many pieces he didn't know where one ended and another began. He cried until there was nothing left, until he was empty and exhausted and wrung out like an old dish rag. Then he ate the rest of the biscuit, because Sarah would have wanted him to, because somewhere in the taste of honey and flour and a little girl's determination to save her family, there was something that almost felt like hope. The next day, Danny found Marcus in the horse barn. The boy stood straight, trying to look older than his 10 years. Rose said I should help with ranch work. I can do whatever needs doing. Marcus looked at this child trying to be a man, saw the fear hiding behind false confidence, saw a boy who'd been abandoned by his father and was terrified it would happen again. You know anything about horses? No, sir, but I can learn. Fair enough. Come here. Marcus led Danny to a stall holding a young mare, chestnut-colored with a white blaze, skittish, not fully broken yet. This is Copper. She needs to learn saddle work. You're going to help me teach her. He showed Danny how to approach slow, how to let the horse smell his hand, how to run fingers along her neck in long strokes that calmed instead of startled. Danny followed every instruction with the intensity of a child who knew this might be his only chance. They worked for an hour, Marcus teaching, Danny learning. The boy had good hands, patient hands, the kind horses responded to. They were fitting the saddle blanket when Jake appeared in the barn doorway. Both Marcus and Danny froze. Jake watched in silence for a long moment, watched Marcus guide Danny's hands to the right position on the saddle, watched the boy fumble with straps he didn't understand. You're doing it wrong, Jake said. Danny's face fell. His hands dropped from the saddle. Jake walked closer. The girth strap goes under the belly first. Then you tighten from the left side. Otherwise the whole thing slides off first time the horse moves. He demonstrated. Hands sure and practiced. Danny watched every movement. Now you try it, Jake said. Danny's hands shook as he undid the strap and started over. Got it wrong. Started again. Jake stood beside him, not touching, not taking over, just there. On the third try, Danny got it right. Good, Jake said. Simple. Direct. But Danny's face lit up like sunrise. Pa never taught me nothing about horses, Danny said. Then froze. Realized what he'd said. Who he'd said it to. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, well, someone should. He spent the next hour teaching. Showed Danny how to check hooves for stones, how to brush down a coat properly, how to read a horse's ears and eyes, to know its mood. Spoke in short sentences. Didn't waste words, but every word mattered. Marcus watched from the shadows. Watched his friend come alive, teaching this boy things he'd taught Emma 7 years ago. Watched the wall Jake had built around his heart develop its first crack. When they finished, Danny stood straighter, proud, had dirt under his nails and horsehair on his shirt and something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Purpose. The next afternoon, Grace was washing clothes behind the kitchen, scrubbing at stains in water so cold it hurt her hands. But she sang while she worked, couldn't help it. Singing was what Grace did when the world got too heavy or too scary or too anything. Her voice carried on the October wind, clear and pure, a song her mother used to hum while cooking. No words, just melody, the kind that made you feel things you didn't have names for. Inside his study, Jake heard it through the open window. His pen stopped moving. His breath caught. Emma used to sing, all the time, morning, noon, and night, made up songs about horses and chickens and the clouds in the sky, sang while playing, while eating, while falling asleep in his arms. Then the fever took her voice along with everything else. Jake stood, walked to the window, saw a red-haired girl hanging wet clothes on a line, 8 years old, skinny as a fence post, singing like her heart would break if she stopped. He should close the window, should tell her to be quiet, should enforce his rule about not wanting to see or hear these children. Instead, he walked outside. Grace saw him coming, and the song died in her throat. She stepped back, eyes wide, ready to run. "Sorry, sir," she stammered. "I'll be quiet. I didn't mean to." "What's that song?" Grace blinked, confused. It's Mama's lullaby. She used to hum it when we were scared." Jake stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. "I didn't say stop," he said quietly. "I asked what it was." "Oh, Mama never told us the name, just said it was something her mama taught her." "Sing it again." "Sir, sing it again." Louder. Grace's voice shook at first. But then muscle memory took over. The melody flowed out pure and clean. Jake closed his eyes, let it wash over him. It wasn't Emma's voice. Would never be Emma's voice. But it was alive and real, and happening right now, in this moment instead of 7 years ago in a grave. When the song ended, Jake opened his eyes. "You can sing while you work," he said. "Don't have to be quiet on my account." He walked away before Grace could respond, but she saw something in his face as he turned, something that might have been the ghost of a smile. That evening, Annie got lost. 3 years old, curious, wandering through a house too big with too many rooms. She pushed open a door, saw a man sitting at a desk covered in papers, decided he looked safe. Annie toddled into Jake's study like she owned it. Jake looked up, saw a tiny girl with blonde curls and a face smudged with dirt from playing outside. She stared at him with eyes that held no fear, no suspicion, just the pure trust of a child too young to know better. "Hello, mister," Annie said. Jake's throat closed. Emma had said those exact words the first time she'd found him in this room. "Hello, mister," like he was a stranger instead of her father. "You shouldn't be here," he managed. "Why not?" "Because I said so." Annie considered this, then climbed onto his lap, just climbed up like it was the most natural thing in the world, settled against his chest, yawned. "You're warm," she said, then closed her eyes. Jake sat frozen. This child in his arms weighed nothing, smelled like sunshine and soap. Her hair tickled his chin. Her small hand curled against his shirt. Emma used to fall asleep on his lap, used to find him working, and climb up and drift off while he wrote letters or reviewed ledgers. Sarah would find them like that, would smile and say, "Leave her be. She's safe with her papa." Jake's arms came up slowly, awkwardly, like they'd forgotten how to hold something small and precious. But once they settled around Annie, they remembered. He sat there for 30 minutes, didn't move, barely breathed, just held this sleeping child and felt something in his chest that had been frozen solid begin to thaw. When Annie finally woke, she looked up at him and smiled. "You're nice," she said, then climbed down and toddled out as casually as she'd entered. Jake sat alone in the gathering dusk, his arms still curved like they were holding something, his heart beating faster than it had in 7 years. The wall was cracking. He could feel it. On the 6th day, Jake found Benji standing outside the horse barn. The boy stood silent and still as stone. Eyes on something inside, face empty of everything except a longing so deep it hurt to see. Jake followed his gaze. Molly, the chestnut mare with the white blaze, Emma's horse, the one she'd learned to ride on, the one that had stood at her funeral like she understood, the one Jake couldn't bear to look at for 7 years. "You like horses?" Jake asked. Benji didn't answer. Didn't even look at him. Just kept staring at Molly with those dead eyes. Jake made a decision he'd regret or be grateful for the rest of his life. "Come with me." He led Benji into the barn. Molly nickered when she saw Jake. Ears forward, eyes bright. She remembered. After 7 years, she still remembered. "This is Molly," Jake said, his voice rougher than he intended. "She was my daughter's horse. Emma loved her more than anything." Benji stepped closer, moved like he was in a dream, reached out one small hand. Molly lowered her head, let the boy's fingers brush her muzzle. Then she did something she hadn't done in 7 years. She nuzzled against him, gentle, soft, like she recognized something in this broken child. And Benji smiled, not big, not loud, just a small curve of lips that had forgotten how, but real, alive. There. Jake's knees nearly buckled. "You want to ride her?" he heard himself ask. Benji looked up, eyes still empty of words but full of desperate hope. Nodded. Jake lifted the boy onto Molly's back, light as a feather, fragile as glass. Benji's hands tangled in the mare's mane. His whole body relaxed for the first time since arriving. Jake took the lead rope, led them around the corral in slow circles. Benji sat straight, small, silent but present in a way he hadn't been before. The ranch hands stopped working to watch. Marcus stood at the barn door with his hat in his hands. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Jake Brennan was touching Emma's horse, walking with a child, doing something besides existing in the tomb he'd built. They walked until the sun touched the mountains, until Molly's coat gleamed with sweat and Benji's face glowed with something that almost looked like joy. When Jake finally lifted him down, Benji stood looking up at him, really looking, seeing, then walked away, silent as he'd come. That night after supper the children gathered in their small rooms. Rose brushed Annie's hair. Grace hummed while mending a torn dress. Danny whittled a piece of wood Marcus had given him, and Benji sat in the corner, looking at his hands, seeing Molly's mane between his fingers, feeling her warmth, her acceptance, her life. He opened his mouth, made a sound, choked, tried again. "Molly!" The word came out like rust breaking, like a door that hadn't opened in 6 months finally giving way. Rose's brush stopped mid-stroke. Grace's humming died. Danny's knife clattered to the floor. "What did you say?" Rose whispered. Benji looked at his sister, at the family that had held together despite everything trying to tear them apart. "Molly," he said again, clearer this time, real. Rose crossed the room in 2 steps, pulled him into her arms. Grace and Danny piled on. Annie squeezed in somehow. They held each other and cried. Joy mixed with relief, mixed with grief for all the words Benji had lost and was finding again. They cried so loud they didn't hear the door open, didn't see Jake standing there, watching these children who'd been broken by life hold each other and choose healing. He stood for a long moment, then quietly closed the door, walked through the house to a room he hadn't entered in 7 years. Sarah and Emma's bedroom. The door stuck, swollen from disuse. Jake put his shoulder against it, pushed hard. It opened with a sound like a sigh. The room smelled like dust and old memories, but underneath that, lavender, Sarah's soap, faint but there. The bed was still made, Sarah's hairbrush on the dresser, Emma's doll propped against the pillows. A life interrupted, frozen, waiting for people who would never return. Jake sat on the edge of the bed, picked up Emma's doll, smoothed its worn dress. "Sarah," he said to the empty room, "I think I found them. I think I found the reason to keep going." Outside the window, Montana stars filled the sky, cold and bright and infinite. Somewhere out there, Sarah and Emma existed in whatever came after. Watching, maybe, hoping, certainly. And in a house that had been a tomb, 5 children slept. Safe, fed, together. And one broken man sat holding a doll and crying for the 2nd time in 7 years. But this time the tears felt different. This time they felt like healing. The 7th day dawned cold and clear. October in Montana painted the world in shades of gold and amber. The aspens on the hillsides burned yellow against evergreen pines. Frost covered the ground until mid-morning, when the sun climbed high enough to melt it away. Rose woke feeling something she hadn't felt in 6 months. Something dangerous and fragile and almost like peace. 6 days at Timber Creek Ranch. 6 days of cooking and working and watching her family come back to life. Danny learning horses from Marcus. Grace singing without fear. Annie following Jake around like a puppy. And Benji. Sweet, silent Benji, who'd said one word and then clammed up again, but at least it was a start. Today was the last day of their trial week. Tomorrow, Jake would decide if they stayed or went. Rose tried not to think about it, tried to focus on breakfast, tried to pretend her hands weren't shaking as she rolled out biscuits and fried bacon, and prayed to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. She was pulling the final batch from the oven when she heard horses. Not the familiar sounds of ranch work. These came fast, hard, purposeful. Rose moved to the window. Her blood turned to ice. Sheriff Walsh sat astride a big roan gelding at the ranch gate. 3 deputies flanked him, all armed, all looking like they'd come for war, not conversation. Marcus appeared from the barn, moved to block the gate. His hand rested casual on his pistol, but nothing about his posture was casual. "Morning, Marcus," Walsh called out. "Pleasant as Sunday church? Need to speak with Brennan. Boss is busy." Wasn't asking permission. The main house door opened. Jake stepped out onto the porch. He wore no gun belt, but Rose knew he kept a rifle just inside the door, knew from the way he stood that he was ready to use it. "State your business, Walsh." The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his coat, held it up like a trophy. "Court order from Judge Morrison. I'm here to retrieve the Matthews children. Legal and proper this time." Jake descended the porch steps slowly, each bootfall deliberate. A man walking toward a rattlesnake he intended to kill. "Those children aren't going anywhere." Walsh's smile widened. Predatory. Mean. "You're harboring fugitives, Brennan. Obstructing justice. I can arrest you right now if you don't hand them over." "Try it." The air went tight, electric. Rose could see it in the set of Jake's shoulders, the way his hands hung loose and ready, the complete absence of fear in his eyes. This was a man who'd killed before, would kill again if pushed. Walsh shifted in his saddle, not quite backing down, but reassessing. "Look," he said, voice reasonable now, conciliatory. "I understand you got attached, but these are orphans, state property. They need proper placement." "Funny thing about that," Jake said. He reached into his own coat, pulled out papers. "I filed adoption papers 8 days ago. Federal court in Missoula approved them 3 days ago. Danny, Grace, Benji, and Annie are legally mine now." The color drained from Walsh's face. "That's not—" He swallowed hard. "You can't just—" "Can and did." Jake's voice went flat, cold. "Rose is ward of widow Margaret Collins, all legal, all proper, all none of your damn business anymore." Marcus stepped forward, added his own paper to the pile. "Signed by Federal Judge Augustus Grant, witnessed by Marshal Henry Dawson. Want to dispute federal jurisdiction? Sheriff, you're welcome to try." Walsh stared at the documents like they were written in a language he didn't understand. His jaw worked. His hands clenched on the reins so hard the leather creaked. "You planned this," he said finally, voice shaking with rage. "You had this planned from the start. I protect what's mine. Those children are worth $500 to me." The words exploded out before Walsh could stop them. His eyes went wide, realizing his mistake. Jake's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted, darkened. "Say that again?" Walsh tried to backtrack. "I meant the state pays for placement, administrative fees. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said." Jake took another step forward, close enough now that Walsh's horse stamped nervous. "How many, Walsh? How many children have you sold? I never—" "How many?" Walsh's face twisted. Fear mixed with fury, mixed with something that might have been shame buried deep. "This ain't over, Brennan." He wheeled his horse. "Not by a long shot. You think some papers protect you? You think the law gives a damn about 5 orphan brats? I'll find a way. I always find a way." He spurred his horse hard. The 3 deputies followed. They thundered down the road, raising dust that hung in the still air like smoke. Jake stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to Marcus. "Double the watch. Day and night. He'll be back. Think he'll try something. I know he will." Inside the kitchen, Rose stood frozen. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard, her knuckles went white. She'd heard everything, every word. Jake had adopted them. Not tomorrow, not maybe. Had already done it days ago and said nothing. They were his. Legally. Permanently. Safe. The word bloomed in her chest like a flower that had been waiting years to grow. That night, Sheriff Thaddeus Walsh sat in the back corner of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Pine Ridge. The whiskey in front of him was his fourth, or maybe his fifth. He'd lost count. Across the table sat Mrs. Constance Porter, prim, proper. Gray hair pulled back so tight it stretched her face into a permanent scowl. Director of the Helena Orphan Asylum. His partner for the last 10 years in a business neither would admit existed. $500, she said quietly, voice clipped. That's what you're losing on the Matthews children, 5 of them at $100 each. I already had buyers lined up. Walsh drained his glass, slammed it down harder than necessary. I know what I'm losing. Do you? Because I'm losing it too. 50-50, remember? That's our arrangement. Damn Brennan and his money. Damn him and his lawyers and his federal connections. Mrs. Porter leaned forward. Her eyes glittered in the lamplight, hard as river stones. Is this about money, Thaddeus, or is this about pride? Walsh looked at his empty glass, at his reflection distorted in the cheap mirror behind the bar, at the man he'd become over 10 years of small compromises that added up to damnation. It hadn't started this way. He'd been a good sheriff once, honest, fair, believed in justice and the law and doing right. Then Martha got sick, his wife. His Martha with her gentle smile and kind hands and the cough that wouldn't stop. The doctor said consumption, said she needed treatment, medicine, care, said it would cost more than a small-town sheriff made in 5 years. Walsh had been desperate, drowning. When Mrs. Porter approached him with her proposal, it had seemed like providence, a way to save his wife and help orphans at the same time. The children would be placed in homes, would work, would earn their keep. Everyone won. Except the children never saw homes. They saw mines, factories, farms where they worked 14-hour days and slept in sheds and died young from accidents or sickness or just giving up. And Martha died anyway. 3 years of expensive treatments that bought nothing but time. She'd passed last spring with Walsh holding her hand and knowing the money that could have eased her suffering had come from selling children into slavery. It's about both, Walsh said finally. Money and pride. Brennan made a fool of me, in front of my men, in front of the whole town. So what do you propose to do? Walsh turned his glass in slow circles on the scarred wood table. Thinking, planning. A good lawman knew how to track prey, knew how to find weaknesses, knew how to strike where it hurt most. Brennan loves that ranch, he said slowly. Built it from nothing after the war. Spent 20 years making it profitable. It's all he has left since his family died of us. Mrs. Porter's thin lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Accidents happen on ranches, fires, especially this time of year when everything's dry. Exactly what I was thinking. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 people who'd crossed lines they could never uncross, who'd gone so far down a dark road that turning back wasn't an option anymore. When, Mrs. Porter asked, Tonight, late, when everyone's sleeping. Walsh stood, dropped coins on the table. Carson and Miller will handle it. Small fire, just the hay barn, enough to send a message. And if Brennan doesn't get the message, then next time it's the house. 2 hours past midnight on October 23, 1889. Deputy Frank Carson and a ranch hand named Miller crept through the darkness toward Timber Creek Ranch. The hay barn stood separate from the other buildings. 3,000 bales of timothy and alfalfa stacked floor to ceiling, worth $2,000. More importantly, positioned between the main barn and the house. Perfect accelerant for a bigger fire if needed. Carson carried a can of kerosene. Miller carried matches. Both carried guns, though they didn't expect to use them. They worked fast, poured kerosene along the base of the barn walls, splashed it on bales near the door. The smell was sharp and chemical in the cold night air. Miller struck a match. The flame looked small and harmless. He tossed it onto the kerosene trail. Fire bloomed like a living thing. Raced along the walls, climbed the hay bales. Within seconds, the whole structure was engulfed. The 2 men ran, disappeared into the trees as the flames reached higher, as the dry wood caught, as the night turned orange and the smell of burning hay filled the valley. Rose woke to Annie crying, not the usual fussy cry of a 3-year-old. This was terror, pure and absolute. Rose stumbled out of bed, pulled Annie close. What's wrong, baby? Annie pointed at the window. Fire, big fire. Rose looked. Her heart stopped. The hay barn was an inferno. Flames shot 50 feet into the air. Sparks swirled like fireflies. The heat was so intense she could feel it through the glass. She heard shouting, boots on wood, men yelling. Get the others up, Rose told Danny, who'd appeared in the doorway. Now! She ran outside in her nightdress and bare feet. The scene was chaos. Ranch hands forming bucket brigades from the creek, Marcus bellowing orders, water flying through the air to splash uselessly against flames that laughed at such small efforts. Jake stood directing the firefighting, shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold, face lit orange by the inferno, fighting a losing battle and knowing it, but fighting anyway. Then Rose heard it, a sound that cut through the roar of flames and shouting men, a sound that stopped her heart. A horse screaming. Not just any horse, that particular whinny, that specific terror. Molly, the small stable attached to the barn, where Emma's horse stayed because Jake couldn't bear to put her with the others, where Benji visited every day, where hope had started to grow for a silent boy who'd lost his voice. "Molly's in there," Rose screamed. "The stable!" Jake turned. His face went white. He'd forgotten. In the chaos and shock, he'd forgotten Emma's horse was in that stable, forgotten everything except putting out the fire. He started running toward the flames. Marcus grabbed him. "Jake, no, you'll die. Let me go. The whole structure's about to collapse." Jake fought against his friend's grip, desperate, broken. About to lose another piece of Emma he couldn't survive losing. Rose ran, didn't think, didn't plan, just ran toward the fire, because Benji loved that horse, because that horse had given her brother his first word back, because some things were worth dying for. "Rose, stop!" Jake's voice. She didn't stop, hit the stable door at full speed. The wood was hot enough to burn her hands. She kicked it open. Smoke billowed out thick and black. Rose pulled her nightdress over her face. Stumbled into hell. The heat was unimaginable, like walking into an oven. Breathing hurt. Seeing was impossible, but she heard Molly, heard the mare screaming and kicking at her stall. Rose felt along the wall, found the stall door. Her fingers scrabbled at the latch, burned, blistered, got it open. Molly bolted past her, knocked Rose backward into the wall. The horse disappeared into the night. Rose tried to follow, took 2 steps. Her legs gave out. The smoke was too thick. Her lungs wouldn't work. The world tilted sideways. She fell. Thought about her mother, about Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie, about dying at 12 because she'd made a stupid choice. Then arms grabbed her, lifted her, carried her. Jake crashed through the stable door with Rose in his arms, stumbled out into air that tasted sweet after the smoke. Fell to his knees on the cold ground. Rose coughed, gasped, sucked in air that hurt going down, but meant life. Jake held her, rocked her, his whole body shaking. "Don't you ever do that again," his voice cracked. "You could have died. Do you understand? You could have died." Rose looked up at him, at this man who'd given her family a home, who'd fed them and taught them and protected them, who'd adopted her siblings and was holding her now like she mattered. "Benji loves that horse," she whispered, throat raw. "I don't care." Jake pulled her tighter. "I can't. I already lost Sarah, lost Emma. I can't lose you too." The words hit Rose like a physical blow. "You, not them. You." "You're my daughter." Jake's voice broke completely, tears streaming down his soot-stained face. "You hear me? You're my daughter, real as Emma ever was. And I can't lose another daughter." Rose felt something in her chest crack open, all the walls she'd built to survive, all the armor against a world that took everything. It shattered. She wrapped her arms around Jake's neck, held on with everything she had. "Papa," she sobbed. "I'm sorry, Papa." It was the first time she'd said it. The first time she'd called any man that word since her father walked away without saying goodbye. Jake made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, held this fierce, brave girl who'd risked everything to save a horse because it mattered to her brother. Around them, the hay barn collapsed, sent a shower of sparks into the night sky. The ranch hands backed away from a heat that couldn't be fought anymore. Let it burn itself out. Marcus found them still holding each other, still crying. Father and daughter forged not by blood but by choice. "Boss," Marcus said gently, "we got a problem." Jake looked up, face streaked with tears and soot. "What?" Marcus held out a kerosene can, half empty, found behind the barn. "This wasn't an accident." Jake's expression went cold, hard. He stood, helped Rose to her feet. "Get her to the house, clean her up, check for burns." He turned to the assembled ranch hands. "I want 4 men on watch at all times, armed, rotating shifts. Anyone approaches this ranch who isn't supposed to be here, you shoot first and ask questions later." "Boss, we can't just—" "Walsh did this." Jake's voice cut like a blade. "Walsh burned my barn and tried to kill my daughter, and I'm going to make him pay." He strode toward the main house. Rose watched him go, saw the rigid set of his shoulders, the controlled fury in every movement. Marcus put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Come on, girl, let's get you patched up." But Rose was looking at something Marcus had set down beside the kerosene can. A scrap of paper, singed at the edges. 3 words written in shaky handwriting. Give them up. The message was clear. Walsh wouldn't stop, wouldn't accept defeat, would burn and threaten and hurt until he got what he wanted or destroyed everything trying. Rose picked up the paper, stared at those 3 words. Then she made a decision. If Walsh wanted a war, she'd give him one. But she wouldn't fight with fire or guns or violence. She'd fight with truth, with evidence, with the one thing men like Walsh feared most: exposure. Inside the main house, Jake stood in his study. The door to Sarah and Emma's room was open now, had been since the night Benji spoke his first word, the room where he'd sat and cried and decided maybe healing was possible. He looked at the photograph on his desk, Sarah smiling, Emma laughing. "I nearly lost another one tonight," he said to their frozen faces. "Rose ran into fire to save Molly, just ran in like it was nothing." He sat heavily, put his head in his hands. "She called me Papa, first time, and all I could think was, what if I'd been too late? What if I'd lost her, like I lost Emma?" The house was silent, but in that silence, Jake heard something, or maybe felt it. Sarah would have fought for those children, would have protected them with everything she had. Emma would have loved them like siblings. And he was done running from the possibility of love because loss might follow. He'd already loved Rose, loved Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie, had loved them probably since the moment he'd seen 5 terrified children and a 12-year-old girl ready to die protecting them. The only question now was what he'd do about it. Jake stood, walked to the window, watched the hay barn burn down to embers, watched his ranch hands keep vigil through the night, thought about a corrupt sheriff who sold children, about fires set in darkness, about threats and fear and violence masquerading as law. And he decided. Tomorrow, he'd start building a case, would find evidence, would expose Walsh for what he was. Tonight, he'd just be grateful. Grateful Rose was alive. Grateful Molly was safe. Grateful he'd been given a second chance at family when he'd thought that door had closed forever. Outside, the Montana sky started to lighten in the east. Dawn coming. A new day. And in rooms throughout the ranch, 5 children slept. Safe. Together. Home. Protected by a man who'd learned that love was always worth the risk of loss. That family was a choice you made every day, and that sometimes the broken pieces of 2 shattered families could come together and make something whole. The morning after the fire dawned gray and cold. Ash drifted through the air like dirty snow. The hay barn stood as a blackened skeleton. Timbers jutted toward the sky like accusing fingers. $2,000 and 6 months of work reduced to charcoal and memory. Jake stood surveying the damage with Marcus at his side. Neither man had slept. They'd kept watch through the night, waiting for Walsh to return, waiting for the next attack. It hadn't come. Yet. "We can't fight him this way," Marcus said, voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. "Walsh has the law on his side, has Judge Morrison in his pocket. We go after him directly. We're the criminals." Jake knew his friend was right. Wanted to ride into Pine Ridge anyway, wanted to drag Walsh into the street and beat him until he confessed everything, make him pay for the fire, for threatening the children, for 10 years of selling orphans like cattle. But violence was what Walsh expected, what he wanted, would give him excuse to arrest Jake, take the children, win. "Then we don't fight him directly," Jake said. "We fight him legally, build a case so solid, even Morrison can't ignore it. With what evidence? We got a kerosene can and a threatening note. Any decent lawyer tears that apart in minutes. Then we get better evidence." Marcus turned to look at his friend, saw determination mixed with something that looked almost like hope. "You got a plan." The beginning of one. That afternoon, widow Margaret Collins arrived at Timber Creek Ranch. She came in a small buggy pulled by an aging mare. Brought with her a basket of food and clothing she'd collected from the women of Pine Ridge. Women who'd heard about the fire, who didn't know the whole story but knew Jake Brennan was a good man protecting children. Collins was 61 years old. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, face lined by sun and years, but eyes sharp as broken glass. Her husband had died in the war. Her 2 sons had followed him 12 years later in a mine collapse. She'd turned her grief into purpose, became the woman people came to when they needed help navigating the law or the church or the complicated machinery of a society that ground up the weak and spit them out. Rose met her at the door, burns bandaged on her hands, throat still raw from smoke, but alive, standing. "Mrs. Collins," Rose said, voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." The older woman pulled Rose into a hug that smelled like lavender and bread. "Child, when I heard what you did..." She held Rose at arm's length, studied her face. "Running into fire to save a horse. That's either the bravest or most foolish thing I ever heard. Probably both, Collins laughed, soft and sad. Your mama would be proud and terrified, same as I am. Jake appeared from the study. He looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight, eyes red-rimmed, face gaunt. But his handshake was firm when he greeted Collins. Margaret, good of you to come. Jake Brennan, you look like death warmed over. When's the last time you slept? Can't remember. Well, that ends now. You're no good to those children dead from exhaustion. She set her basket down. All business. Now, Rose tells me Walsh set the fire, that he's threatening the children. What are we going to do about it? They gathered in the study. Jake, Marcus, Collins, Rose. Danny stood guard at the door, keeping the younger ones away, protecting them from knowledge that would give them nightmares. Jake laid out what they knew. Walsh's threat in town. The $500 comment. The fire. The note. A pattern of behavior that suggested something deeper than simple corruption. Collins listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, she sat back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin. I know someone, she said finally. A young woman who works at the Helena Orphan Asylum, Rebecca Chen. She's written to me before, concerned about children disappearing, about transfers that don't make sense. Can she get us proof? Jake asked. Maybe. If she's willing to risk her position, her safety. Collins met his eyes. What you're asking isn't small, Jake. If Walsh finds out someone's investigating, he won't just burn a barn next time. I know. And you're willing to put others at risk. The question hung heavy in the air. Jake thought about Rose running into fire, about Benji's empty eyes, about 63 children whose names he didn't know sold into lives of suffering. Yes, he said, because the alternative is letting him keep doing it, keep selling children, keep destroying lives. I won't stand by anymore. Collins nodded slowly. Then I'll write to Rebecca, arrange a meeting. Missoula is halfway between here and Helena, neutral ground. She left an hour later with promises to be in touch, with warnings to be careful, with a look in her eyes that said she understood what they were starting couldn't be stopped once it began. 3 days later, Jake and Marcus rode to Missoula, left the ranch under heavy guard, Danny in charge of watching over his sisters, Rose running the kitchen with fierce efficiency despite her bandaged hands. They met Rebecca Chen in a boarding house on the edge of town, a place where questions weren't asked and strangers weren't remembered. She was younger than Jake expected, 28, with black hair pulled back tight, delicate features that hid a core of steel. Her eyes held the wariness of someone who'd learned to navigate a world that judged her for the shape of her face and the color of her skin. Mr. Brennan, she said, voice soft but firm, Mrs. Collins says you need information about the orphan asylum, about children being transferred. Sold. Rebecca flinched. The word sold hit like a slap. I've suspected for 3 years, she said. Since I started working there, children come in, get cleaned up, fed. Then Mrs. Porter calls them to her office. They leave with men I don't know, go to places that are supposed to be families, but... She trailed off, swallowed hard. I got a letter once, from a boy named Thomas, 10 years old when he left. He wrote from a mine in Butte, said he worked 14 hours a day, said 2 children had died in a collapse, said please help us. What did you do? Brought it to Mrs. Porter. She said the boy was lying, trying to get out of honest work. Burned the letter in front of me. Rebecca's hands clenched. I knew then, but I had no proof, no evidence, just a feeling in my gut that something was wrong. Jake leaned forward. Can you get proof? Mrs. Porter keeps records, locked in a cabinet in her office. Transfer papers, destinations, payment records. Rebecca met his eyes. If I could copy them... It's dangerous, Marcus said. If she catches you... I know. Rebecca's voice didn't waver. But I see those children's faces every day. See them try to be brave when they're terrified. See them disappear and wonder if they're dead in a mine somewhere. I can't keep doing nothing. Jake saw himself in this young woman. Saw someone who'd watched the world be cruel and decided to fight back even when fighting meant risking everything. When? He asked. Tomorrow night. Mrs. Porter goes to church on Thursdays, leaves the asylum at 6, doesn't return until 9. That gives me 3 hours. 3 hours to break into a locked cabinet, copy dozens of documents, and put everything back without anyone noticing. Rebecca smiled, small and fierce. I'm very good at being invisible, Mr. Brennan. People tend not to notice the Chinese nurse. It's my greatest advantage. They spent the next hour planning. Rebecca would copy what she could, hide the documents in the linen closet, retrieve them the following day when she left for her scheduled day off. Widow Collins would meet her in Missoula, transport the papers back to Timber Creek. Simple, direct. A dozen ways it could go wrong. When they finished, Rebecca stood to leave. Jake stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You could lose your job, your reputation. Walsh could come after you." Rebecca looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "My parents brought me to America when I was 3, she said quietly. "Promised me this was a land of opportunity, of freedom. Then my father died building the railroad. My mother died in a laundry fire. I was 8, alone. The orphanage in San Francisco." She stopped, breathed. "I know what happens to children with no one to protect them, Mr. Brennan. I lived it. So when I see a chance to protect others, I take it." She left before Jake could respond. Disappeared into the Missoula afternoon like smoke. Marcus watched her go, then turned to his friend. "That's a brave woman. That's a woman who's going to get herself killed if we're not careful. You want to call it off." Jake thought about Rose running into fire, about 5 children who'd been hours away from being separated and sold, about 63 names on documents he hadn't seen yet but knew existed. "No," he said. "We see it through." They rode back to Timber Creek in silence, each man lost in thoughts of what came next, of risks and consequences and the weight of choices that affected lives beyond their own. The ranch looked different when they arrived. Danny had organized the younger children into teams. Grace and Annie were feeding chickens. Benji was brushing down horses under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands, work continuing despite the threat hanging over them all. Rose met them at the door, flour on her apron, exhaustion in her eyes. "How did it go?" Jake told her, watched her face as she processed the information, saw hope, war with fear. "When will we know if it worked?" 2 days, maybe 3. Rose nodded, turned to go back to the kitchen. Jake caught her shoulder. "You did good while we were gone. Marcus says Danny had everything running smooth." "We're a team." Rose's voice was matter-of-fact. "That's what families do." She walked away before Jake could respond, left him standing there with those words echoing in his head. Family. They'd become that somehow. In the span of 2 weeks, 5 orphans and a broken widower and a ranch that had been a tomb. Become something that looked like family, felt like family, was family in every way that mattered. Jake found Danny in the barn. The boy was mucking stalls, hard work that built muscle and character. He looked up when Jake entered, straightened, trying to look older than his 10 years. "Everything all right, sir? You can call me Jake, or—" He hesitated. The next word felt huge, impossible, right? "Or you can call me what Rose does." Danny stared. "Papa, if you want to." The boy's face crumpled just for a second. Then he got it under control, nodded. "Yes, sir. Papa." Testing the word, finding it fit. Jake put a hand on Danny's shoulder, squeezed once. All the emotion he couldn't put into words compressed into that simple gesture. 2 days later, the waiting ended. Widow Collins arrived at sunset. Her buggy moved fast, too fast for a woman her age, driving an old mare. She pulled up to the house and climbed down before the wheels stopped rolling. "I have them," she said, breathless, triumphant. Rebecca got them all. She carried a leather satchel into the study, set it on Jake's desk like it contained gold, which in a way it did. Jake opened it, pulled out sheaf after sheaf of paper, transfer documents, payment ledgers, correspondence between Walsh and Mrs. Porter, names, dates, destinations, money changing hands, 63 children over 10 years, only 8 legitimate adoptions, 55 sold to mines and factories and farms that worked children to death. Marcus read over Jake's shoulder. His face went pale. Sweet Jesus. One name jumped out at Jake, stopped his breath. Thomas Matthews, Jr., age 12, transferred August 1886. Destination Southern Cotton Farm, Greenville, Mississippi. Payment $80. Rose's cousin, Danny's cousin. The boy they'd thought died in a farm accident 3 years ago. He hadn't died. He'd been sold. Jake's hand shook as he set the paper down. Rage built in his chest like steam in a boiler with no release valve. "This is enough," Collins said. "More than enough. We take this to Marshal Dawson in Missoula. Federal jurisdiction. Walsh can't touch it." "I'll go," Jake said immediately. "No." The voice came from the doorway. They all turned. Rose stood there, chin up, eyes fierce. "I'll go," she repeated. "Absolutely not." Jake was on his feet. "It's too dangerous. Walsh is watching you. He's watching Marcus. He's watching every man on this ranch." Rose stepped into the room. "But he's not watching me. I'm just a 12-year-old girl who'd think I'm carrying evidence that could destroy him. Rose, no. It has to be me, Papa." The words still sounded new in her mouth, precious. "Walsh knows if you leave the ranch, he'll intercept you, take the documents. Maybe worse, but me, I'm nobody. I can slip through." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in her room and ride to Missoula himself. But everything she said was true. Walsh would be watching him, would be ready, would never suspect a child. 45 miles, Jake said, voice rough. Through mountain country, alone. I can do it. What if he catches you anyway? What if something goes wrong? Rose met his eyes. In hers he saw determination that reminded him of Sarah, courage that reminded him of soldiers he'd fought beside in the war, love that was entirely her own. Then I fail, she said simply. But at least I tried, at least I fought. The room was silent. Collins watched Jake wrestle with fear and pride, and the terrible knowledge that Rose was right. Marcus spoke quietly. I'll draw her a map. Show her the back trails, paths Walsh won't know about. I'll teach her to shoot. Another ranch hand offered from the doorway, in case she needs to defend herself. I'll pack supplies, Collins added. Food, water, money for emergencies. They were all looking at Jake, waiting for his decision, waiting for him to be the father who protected or the father who trusted. Jake looked at Rose, at this fierce, brave girl who'd hit a lawman with a pot, who'd run into fire to save a horse, who'd kept her family together through 6 months of hell, who was asking him to let her go into danger one more time. Every instinct screamed no, screamed to keep her safe, lock her away, never let anything threaten her again. But he remembered Sarah, remembered her strength, her refusal to be coddled or protected when there was work to be done, remembered the woman he'd fallen in love with precisely because she was brave enough to stand beside him instead of behind him. Rose had that same strength, that same courage, and denying it would be denying who she was. All right, Jake said. The words felt like swallowing broken glass. You go, but you take my fastest horse, you carry a gun, and you promise me something. What? You come back. His voice cracked. You do what needs doing, and you come back to your papa, because I just found you, and I can't lose you. Rose crossed the room, wrapped her arms around Jake's waist, held tight. I promise, she whispered. I'll come back. They spent the next day preparing. Marcus drew detailed maps, showed Rose the game trails that cut through the mountains, the creek crossings, the landmarks to watch for. Jake taught her to ride Thunder, his gray gelding, fastest horse on the ranch, taught her to sit low, to move with the animal instead of against it, to trust the horse's instincts in the dark. One of the hands named Samuel taught her to shoot, started with targets, moved to shooting while moving. She wasn't great, but she was good enough to hit center mass at 20 feet, good enough to defend herself if cornered. Collins packed supplies, dried meat, hardtack, a canteen of water, matches, a knife, $40 in case of emergency. The documents sewn into a waterproof pouch that would go under Rose's shirt, against her skin, hidden. The night before she left, the whole family gathered for dinner, all 7 of them. Jake at the head of the table, Rose to his right, Danny to his left, Grace and Annie and Benji across from them, Marcus at the far end, a family forged by choice and circumstance and love. No one talked about what came next. They just ate, shared stories, laughed at Annie's attempts to eat corn on the cob, listened to Grace sing after the meal ended. When the younger ones went to bed, Danny pulled Rose aside. If you don't come back, he started, I will. But if you don't, if something happens, I need to know what to do. Rose looked at her brother, at this boy trying so hard to be a man. You protect them, she said. You keep Grace and Benji and Annie safe. You trust Papa, and you remember we're Whitfields. We're Matthews. We don't quit. Danny nodded, hugged his sister hard, walked away before she could see him cry. Jake found Rose in the kitchen an hour later. She was cleaning, organizing, doing anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from thinking about tomorrow. You should sleep, he said. Can't. Jake pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it. Inside was a silver necklace, simple, delicate, a small cross on a thin chain. This was Sarah's, he said. Wore it every day from the time we married until... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. I want you to have it. Papa, I can't. Yes, you can. For protection, for luck, for... His voice broke. So you remember, you have someone waiting for you to come home. Rose took the necklace with trembling hands. Let Jake fasten it around her neck. The silver was warm from his pocket. Felt like a promise against her skin. Thank you, she whispered. Jake pulled her into a hug. Held this daughter who wasn't his by blood, but was his in every way that mattered. You're the bravest person I know, he said into her hair. Braver than any soldier I fought with. Braver than me. And I'm so damn proud to be your father. Rose cried then. Let herself break because tomorrow she'd need to be steel. Tonight she could just be a 12-year-old girl scared of what came next, but determined to face it anyway. They stood like that until the fire in the stove burned down to embers, until the house grew quiet around them, until there was nothing left to say and everything to hope for. Tomorrow, Rose would ride into danger. Tonight, she was home, safe, loved, and that would have to be enough. Midnight on October 30th, 1889. The Montana sky blazed with stars cold and distant as judgment. Rose Matthews sat astride Thunder at the edge of Timber Creek Ranch. The gelding stamped nervous, sensing the tension radiating from the small figure on his back. Jake stood beside them, one hand on the horse's neck, the other holding a letter for Marshal Henry Dawson, official, detailed, explaining everything. 45 miles, Jake said again, like repeating it would make it safer. Stay off the main roads. Follow the creek until you reach Eagle Canyon, then north through the pass. I remember. Rose's voice was steadier than her hands, the documents pressed against her ribs under her shirt. 47 pages that could destroy Walsh, save 55 children, change everything, or get her killed. If anything looks wrong, Jake continued, if you see riders, hear anything suspicious, you turn around and come straight back. The evidence isn't worth your life. Rose looked down at this man who'd become her father in 2 weeks, saw fear naked on his face, fear she understood because she felt it too. I'll be careful, Papa. Jake reached up, adjusted the rifle scabbard one more time, though it didn't need adjusting, checked the pistol at her hip, the knife in her boot, the canteen. The food, finding reasons to delay the inevitable. Jake, Marcus's voice from the shadows, gentle. She needs to go, before the moon sets. Jake nodded, stepped back, looked at Rose and saw Sarah's courage, Emma's determination, this girl's own fierce heart. I love you, he said. 3 words that still felt new and strange and absolutely true. Rose's composure cracked, just for a second, then she gathered it back. I love you too, Papa. I'll see you tomorrow. She touched her heels to Thunder's flanks. The horse moved from walk to trot to canter. Rose didn't look back, couldn't. If she looked back, she'd see Jake standing there, and her resolve would shatter. The ranch disappeared behind her, swallowed by darkness and distance. Rose was alone with a horse and the stars and documents that weighed more than paper should. She followed the creek like Marcus taught her. Let Thunder pick his way over rocks and fallen logs. The water rushed beside them, constant, cold. The only sound in a world gone silent. An hour passed. 2. The mountains rose black against the sky. Eagle Canyon loomed ahead, a narrow cut through stone where the creek ran fast and deep. Rose was halfway through the canyon when she heard it. Hoofbeats, not the steady rhythm of her own horse. These came from behind, fast, multiple riders pushing hard. Her blood turned to ice. She urged Thunder faster. The gelding responded, stretched into a gallop that echoed off canyon walls, but the sounds behind grew louder, closer. Someone was hunting her. Rose broke free of the canyon onto open ground, looked back, saw torches bobbing in the darkness. 3 riders, maybe 4. A quarter-mile behind and closing, Walsh had known, had been watching, had waited for exactly this. Thunder ran like his life depended on it. Maybe it did. Rose leaned low over his neck, felt the powerful muscles bunch and release, heard the gelding's breathing turn ragged. Come on, she whispered. Come on, boy, just a little farther. But the riders kept coming, and Thunder was tiring. She could feel it in the way he stumbled, the way his stride shortened. They were 2 miles past Eagle Canyon when it happened. Thunder's front hoof caught a hole hidden by shadow and dry grass. The leg buckled. The horse screamed, went down hard. Rose flew from the saddle, hit the ground rolling. Training from falling off horses as a child saved her from breaking bones. She came up scratched and bruised but whole. Thunder tried to stand, fell back. His left foreleg hung wrong, broken or badly sprained. Either way, he couldn't run. Rose wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to apologize to this brave horse who'd given everything and gotten hurt for her mistakes. Instead, she pulled the rifle from its scabbard, checked the pistol, started running, left the trail, plunged into scrub pine and rocky ground. The documents dug into her ribs with every breath. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed, but she ran. Behind her, the hoofbeats stopped. Voices shouted. Someone had found Thunder. She's on foot, spread out. Frank Carson's voice, the deputy she'd hit with a pot, who'd tried to take her family, who'd helped burn Jake's barn. Rose ran harder. The scrub pine thickened. Rose pushed through branches that clawed her face and arms, kept low, kept moving, found a jumble of boulders, and wedged herself between 2 that formed a narrow V. She pulled the pistol, checked the cylinder. 6 shots. Samuel had taught her to make them count. Footsteps crunched through dry grass. A torch cast jumping shadows. Carson appeared, big, mean, gun drawn. Come out, girl. Make this easy. Rose's finger tightened on the trigger. Her hand shook. The pistol felt heavy as sin. Carson moved closer, 10 feet away. 8, 6. I know you're here. Saw you run this way. Ain't nowhere to go. Rose closed her eyes, breathed, remembered what Samuel taught her. Front sight. Steady pressure. Don't jerk. She opened her eyes, aimed. Carson was 5 feet away. Found you, he said. Smiled ugly, raised his gun. Rose fired first. The pistol bucked in her hand. The sound crashed through the night like the end of the world. Carson's smile disappeared. He looked down at his leg, at the blood spreading dark across his pants. You shot me, he said, disbelief mixing with pain. You actually shot me. Rose stood, kept the pistol trained on him. Her whole body shook, but her aim stayed true. Drop your gun. Carson laughed, bitter. You're just a kid. You won't shoot again. Rose adjusted her aim. Higher, center mass, like Samuel taught. Try me. Something in her voice made Carson believe. He dropped his weapon, pressed both hands to his bleeding thigh. Walsh, he shouted. She's here. She shot me. Rose ran, left Carson bleeding and shouting, crashed through the pines toward open ground, toward Missoula somewhere in the darkness ahead. 2 more riders came from her left. Rose fired twice. Didn't aim to hit, just to scare, make them hesitate. It worked. They pulled up, gave her 20 yards. She broke into a clearing. Moonlight turned the world silver and black. No cover, nowhere to hide. Just open ground, and the knowledge that if they caught her now, it was over. Walsh appeared on horseback directly ahead, blocked her path, gun drawn and pointing at her chest. End of the line, Rose. She stopped, gasping, bleeding from a dozen scratches, pistol hanging at her side with 3 shots left. Let me pass. Can't do that. You got something that belongs to me. Documents that prove you're a child slaver. Walsh flinched. The words hit like slaps. I never enslaved anyone. I placed orphans in working homes, gave them purpose. You sold them, 63 children, 55 of them, to mines and factories. How much did you make, Sheriff? How much is a child worth? You don't understand. My wife was dying. I needed money for doctors, for medicine. I did what I had to do. Rose heard something in his voice. Not quite guilt, not quite shame. The sound of a man who'd made terrible choices and convinced himself they were necessary. Your wife died anyway, Rose said quietly. All those children suffering, all that pain, and she died anyway. Walsh's face twisted. Shut your mouth. How many of them are dead now? How many died in cave-ins or got crushed by machines or just gave up because no one came to save them? I said shut up. Thomas Matthews is my cousin. You sold him 3 years ago. We thought he was dead, but he's not dead. He's picking cotton in Mississippi, 12 years old and working like a slave because you needed money. Walsh's gun hand wavered. Rose saw it, saw the crack in his armor. I'm going to Missoula, she said. I'm going to give these documents to Marshal Dawson, and you're going to prison where you belong. She started walking, straight toward Walsh, toward his horse, toward the gun pointing at her heart. Stop! Walsh's voice cracked. Stop right there or I'll shoot. Rose kept walking. No, you won't. I will. I'll put you down like a dog. Then do it. Rose was 10 feet away now. 8, 6. Shoot a 12-year-old girl. Add murder to your list of crimes. See if that helps you sleep. Walsh's hand shook. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. This close, Rose could see his face. Saw a man hollowed out by grief and poor choices. A man who'd started down a dark road and couldn't find his way back. Please, Walsh whispered. Please just give me the documents. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. And the 55 children, I can't help them. Then I can't help you. Rose walked past his horse, past the gun, past the sheriff who'd terrorized her family and burned Jake's barn and destroyed so many lives. She made it 5 steps before Walsh spoke again. I'm sorry, he said, voice breaking. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Rose stopped, didn't turn around. Tell it to the judge. She walked into the darkness, walked until the adrenaline faded and her legs gave out. Collapsed under a pine tree with her back against rough bark and her whole body shaking. She'd done it, shot a man, faced down Walsh, kept the documents safe. But she was lost, bleeding, exhausted. Missoula was miles away through country she didn't know. Rose pulled out Sarah's necklace. The cross caught moonlight. She thought about Jake waiting at the ranch, about Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie sleeping safe because she'd promised to protect them, about promises made and kept even when keeping them hurt. She stood, started walking north, toward where Missoula had to be, toward Marshal Dawson and justice and the hope that all this pain meant something. Dawn found Rose stumbling into Missoula on feet that had walked through night into day. Her clothes were torn, her face scratched and dirty. Blood had dried on her hands from falls and branches, and she couldn't remember what else. People stared, moved aside. This wild child limping down Main Street like something from a nightmare. Rose found the marshal's office through sheer determination, pushed through the door, saw a man with silver hair and hard blue eyes look up from his desk. "I need Marshal Henry Dawson," she said, voice raw. "That's me. Who are you?" "Rose Matthews. Jake Brennan sent me." She fumbled under her shirt, pulled out the waterproof pouch, set it on his desk with shaking hands. "This is proof that Sheriff Thaddeus Walsh has been selling orphans for 10 years. 63 children, 55 of them to mines and factories. I rode 45 miles through the night to bring you this. Walsh and his men chased me. I shot Deputy Carson, and I'm not leaving until you promise me you'll arrest them all." Dawson stared. At this child who looked like she'd walked through hell. At the pouch on his desk. At the determination burning in eyes that should have been defeated. "Sit down before you fall down," he said. Rose's legs gave out. She sank into a chair. Dawson opened the pouch, started reading. His face went from skeptical to shocked to furious. He read for 20 minutes. Rose dozed despite herself, woke when Dawson swore viciously. "This is real," he said. "All of it. Names, dates, payments, correspondence between Walsh and this Porter woman." He looked at Rose. "How did you get this?" "A nurse named Rebecca Chen. She works at the orphan asylum. Risked everything to copy those papers." Dawson stood, walked to the door, shouted for his deputies. 3 men appeared, young, armed, ready. "We ride to Pine Ridge now. Arrest warrants for Sheriff Thaddeus Walsh, Deputy Frank Carson, and Mrs. Constance Porter of Helena. Charges are child trafficking, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." The deputies moved fast, gathered weapons and horses. Within minutes they were ready. Dawson looked at Rose. "You're coming?" "Yes." "You can barely stand." "I'm coming." Something in her voice told him arguing was pointless. He nodded, got her a horse, a gentle mare that wouldn't spook. They rode hard. Rose held on through pain and exhaustion. Held on because she needed to see this, needed to watch Walsh face justice. They reached Pine Ridge at noon. The town went quiet when 4 federal deputies rode in with a half-dead girl. Walsh stood outside his office. Saw them coming. His face went white. Dawson dismounted, pulled the arrest warrant from his coat. "Thaddeus Walsh, you're under arrest for child trafficking and conspiracy. Put your hands behind your back." Walsh didn't move, didn't fight, just stood there as they cuffed him, as they read the charges, as the whole town watched their sheriff fall. "I want a lawyer," Walsh said finally. "You'll get one, at your trial." Dawson turned to his men. "Take him." They found Carson at the doctor's office, leg bandaged, pale from blood loss. He tried to run, made it 3 steps before they tackled him. Mrs. Porter was arrested in Helena 2 hours later, dragged from the orphan asylum screaming about false accusations and lies. All 3 locked in federal custody, awaiting trial. Rose watched it happen. Watched the man who'd terrorized her family get led away in chains, felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in months. It was over. Walsh couldn't hurt them anymore. Dawson found her sitting on the boardwalk, staring at nothing. "You did it," he said quietly. "You brought down a corrupt sheriff and saved 55 children. How do you feel?" Rose thought about it. Thought about the fear and the running and shooting Carson and facing Walsh down. "Tired," she said finally. "I feel really tired." Dawson smiled. "Come on, let's get you home." He gave Rose his own horse. Rode beside her the 15 miles to Timber Creek Ranch. The sun was setting when they crested the ridge. Jake stood in the yard, had been standing there since dawn, watching the road, waiting. He saw them coming. Saw Rose slumped in the saddle. Saw Dawson riding escort. Jake ran, pulled Rose off the horse before it stopped, held her so tight she couldn't breathe. Didn't care. "Papa," she whispered. "I did it. I got them." "I know, baby. I know. You were so brave." Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie came running, piled onto Jake and Rose, a tangle of family holding each other and crying and laughing all at once. Marcus stood nearby, tears streaming down his weathered face, Widow Collins beside him, dabbing her eyes. And Rose. Rose stood in the center of it all, held by her father, surrounded by her family. Safe, home, victorious. She'd ridden through darkness and fear, had faced down evil men with guns, had kept her promise, and now she could rest. The wheels of justice turned slow, but they turned. 3 days after Walsh's arrest, Marshal Dawson began the work of finding 55 children scattered across Montana and beyond. He sent telegrams to mines in Butte and to Great Falls, to textile mills in the east, to cotton farms in the south. Each message carried the same words: federal investigation, child trafficking, return all minors under age 14 immediately. The responses came back over the following week. Some cooperative, some hostile, some claiming they'd bought the children legally and deserved compensation. Dawson's replies were brief. Return the children or face federal prosecution. Your choice. On November 3, 1889, the first rescue happened. Dawson and 4 deputies rode to Copper Mountain Mine, 40 miles northeast of Missoula, a hole in the ground that ate men and boys and gave back copper and death. The mine superintendent tried to block them, said the children were apprentices, learning a trade, earning honest wages. Dawson showed him the arrest warrant, the evidence, the choice between cooperation and prison. 17 children emerged from the darkness, ages 7 to 14, faces black with coal dust, hands scarred from handling tools meant for grown men. One boy missing 3 fingers on his left hand from a cave-in. Another with a twisted leg that had healed wrong after being crushed by falling rock. They stood blinking in sunlight they hadn't seen in weeks, months, years. A deputy asked if they wanted to go home. The oldest boy, 13, looked at him with eyes that had forgotten hope. "We don't have homes, that's why we're here." "You do now," Dawson said. "Federal government's your guardian until we find you families. Real families, not this." The boy started to cry, then another, then all 17, crying because for the first time since Walsh sold them, they believed someone might actually care if they lived or died. November 5th brought the textile mill rescue, Northern Mill outside of Billings. 12 children working looms in a building that shook and roared like a living thing. 10 of them had respiratory disease from breathing lint and fiber. One girl had lost hearing in her left ear from the constant noise. They were so thin, their bones showed through their skin like knives. Dawson's jaw tightened when he saw them. When he heard how they worked 14-hour days, slept on the floor, ate scraps the adult workers wouldn't touch, all for the privilege of not starving on the street. He gathered them gently, spoke soft, promised them food and safety and beds that didn't move beneath their exhausted bodies. The mill owner demanded payment for lost labor. Dawson arrested him on the spot for conspiracy and child endangerment. November 7th was the hardest. Southern Cotton Farm, Greenville, Mississippi. 15 children who'd been shipped south to pick cotton under a sun that baked the ground hard as iron, who'd been whipped for working too slow, locked in sheds at night, fed slop that pigs wouldn't eat. The farm owner met them with a shotgun and 20 men. Dawson didn't back down, showed his badge, his warrant, the rifles his deputies carried. "These children are federal property now. You interfere, you hang for kidnapping." The standoff lasted an hour. Then the farm owner's wife appeared, older woman with a face carved from guilt and regret. She'd seen what happened to these children, had said nothing because speaking meant losing the farm. But looking at federal marshals, she found something she thought had died years ago: courage. "Let them go, Henry. For the love of God, let them go." Her husband lowered his shotgun. The children were released. Among them was a boy of 15, tall, thin, dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. He stood apart from the others, wary, waiting for the trick, the catch, the moment when hope revealed itself as another lie. Dawson checked his list. "Thomas Matthews, Jr." The boy flinched, nodded. "You got family in Montana, your cousin Rose. She's the one who brought down Walsh, saved all of you." Thomas's face crumpled. He'd spent 3 years believing he was forgotten, abandoned, that no one cared enough to look. He'd been wrong. Dawson gathered all the rescued children, 44 out of 55. The other 11 were scattered too far or already dead, or simply vanished into places even federal marshals couldn't reach. He brought them to Missoula, to a boarding house that had been emptied for their use, fed them, clothed them, let doctors examine their injuries and sickness. Then he sent word to Timber Creek Ranch. Jake received the telegram on November 10th, read it twice to make sure he understood. Thomas Matthews, Jr. found alive, requesting family visit, Missoula boarding house. Jake showed it to Rose, watched her face transform from confusion to shock to joy, so pure it hurt to see. "Thomas is alive," she whispered. "Danny's cousin, my cousin, he's alive." They rode to Missoula the next morning, all of them, Jake and Rose and Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie. Marcus stayed behind to mind the ranch, but the family went together, found Thomas in a room with 5 other boys. He stood when they entered, tall and thin and trying not to hope too hard. Danny saw him first, froze, then ran across the room and grabbed his cousin in a hug that nearly knocked them both over. "I thought you were dead. They told us you died in a farm accident. 3 years we thought you were dead," Thomas held his younger cousin, his whole body shaking. "I thought nobody cared. Thought I'd been forgotten." "Never," Danny said fiercely. "Never forgotten." Rose approached slowly. The last time she'd seen Thomas, she'd been 9 years old. He'd been 12. They'd played together at family gatherings, had been close before her mama died, and his parents sent him to the orphanage after they couldn't afford to feed him. "Thomas," she said quietly. He looked at her, at this girl who'd ridden through danger to save children she'd never met, who'd faced down Walsh and won. "Rose, Danny said you were the one, said you got the evidence. A nurse named Rebecca helped, and Papa, and lots of people." "Papa?" Thomas looked confused. Rose gestured to Jake. "Thomas, this is Jake Brennan. He adopted Danny and Grace and Benji and Annie. Gave us a home. Gave us family." Jake stepped forward, extended his hand. Thomas took it. The handshake was firm despite Thomas's exhaustion. "You're welcome at Timber Creek any time," Jake said. "Your family. That means you got a place with us long as you want it." Thomas's composure shattered. This boy who'd survived 3 years of hell, who'd been beaten and starved and worked until his hands bled, who'd given up hope of ever seeing family again. He cried, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Rose and Danny held him, held their cousin while he broke apart and started to heal. Around them, the other rescued children watched, saw family reunited, saw love that hadn't forgotten despite time and distance, saw hope made real. And they started to believe maybe their own stories could have happy endings too. The trial began November 15, 1889, Federal Courthouse in Missoula. The biggest room in the building packed with over 200 people. Reporters from newspapers as far as Chicago. Lawyers and lawmen and citizens who'd heard about the case and wanted to see justice done. Judge Augustus Grant presided. 70 years old, white beard, eyes like flint. Reputation for fairness matched only by his reputation for harsh sentences when the crime warranted. Walsh sat at the defendant's table, clean-shaved, hair combed, wearing his best suit, looking like a respectable sheriff instead of a man who'd sold 63 children. His lawyer was expensive, brought from Helena, a man who specialized in making guilty men look innocent. Carson sat beside Walsh, legs still bandaged, face pale, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Mrs. Porter sat apart. Her lawyer had convinced her to plead guilty in exchange for reduced sentence. She'd already given a full confession, named names, provided details that corroborated everything in Rebecca's documents. The prosecution called its first witness. Marshal Henry Dawson took the stand, laid out the case methodically, showed the court 47 pages of evidence, transfer documents with Walsh's signature, payment ledgers showing money exchanged, letters between Walsh and Porter discussing prices and destinations. The defense objected, called the documents hearsay, illegally obtained. Judge Grant examined them personally, read for an hour while the courtroom waited in silence. "These documents are admitted," he said finally. "Proceed." The prosecution called Rebecca Chen. She walked to the stand with her head high despite the whispers, despite the stares from people who thought a Chinese woman had no business testifying in a white man's court. She told her story, 3 years watching children disappear, finding the letter from the boy in the mine, breaking into Porter's office to copy the records, risking everything because it was right. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, asked about her background, her ethnicity, implied she was lying to gain attention. Rebecca met his eyes and didn't flinch. "I risked my job and my safety to expose these crimes. What exactly would I gain by lying?" The attorney had no answer. 17 children from Copper Mountain Mine testified, told the court about 14-hour days in darkness, about cave-ins and injuries, about children who died and were buried in unmarked graves because no one cared enough to send them home. 12 children from the textile mill, 10 from the cotton farm. Each story worse than the last. Each testimony another nail in Walsh's coffin. Then Rose took the stand. She wore a simple dress Collins had made, hair pulled back, hands folded in her lap, looking younger than her 12 years and somehow older at the same time. The prosecutor asked her to tell her story. Rose spoke quietly but clearly, told the court about her mother dying, her father leaving, 6 months of hiding and fear, Walsh finding them, trying to separate the family, Carson grabbing Grace by the hair. "I hit him with my mother's copper pot," she said. "To protect my sister, I'd do it again." No one in the courtroom doubted her. She told them about Jake, about finding safety at Timber Creek Ranch, about the fire Walsh set, about riding through the night to bring evidence to Dawson, About shooting Carson when he tried to stop her. "I'm not proud I hurt someone," Rose said. "But I'm not sorry either. He was going to kill me, and I had 55 children depending on me to survive." The defense attorney stood, tried to paint Rose as a violent child, a liar seeking revenge. Rose looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "You weren't there," she said simply. "You didn't see those children's faces when they were rescued, didn't hear them cry because someone finally came for them. I was there, I saw, and nothing you say will make me doubt I did the right thing." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Grant's gavel came down hard. "Order, I will have order." But even Grant's stern face couldn't quite hide approval. The prosecution's final witness was Thomas Matthews, Jr. He walked to the stand like a man going to his execution. Sat, placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor was gentle. Asked about his time on the cotton farm. Thomas answered in a voice that shook but held. Then the prosecutor asked a question no one expected. "Thomas, did you ever witness Sheriff Walsh commit any crimes other than selling children?" Thomas went pale. His hands gripped the witness box rail. "Objection!" The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Irrelevant and prejudicial." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said calmly, "this goes to establishing a pattern of criminal behavior." Grant considered. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, son." Thomas looked at Walsh, at the man who'd sold him, who'd destroyed his life and the lives of 62 other children. "He killed a man," Thomas said, voice gaining strength. 1887. A farmer named Daniel Harper had bought 2 children from Walsh, boy and girl, brother and sister. Harper figured out what was happening, that Walsh was selling kids. He came to Pine Ridge, said he was going to report it, going to the federal marshals. The courtroom went dead silent. Walsh met him outside of town. I was there. I'd run away from the cotton farm, made it back to Montana, was hiding near the road. I saw everything. What did you see? Walsh shot him, 1 bullet to the chest, told his deputies it was self-defense, that Harper drew first, but Harper never touched his gun. I saw. Thomas's voice broke. Walsh buried him in an unmarked grave, told Harper's family he'd gone east. They believed it because, why wouldn't they? He was the sheriff. The courtroom exploded, reporters scrambling for the doors, spectators shouting, Walsh on his feet screaming that Thomas was lying. Grant's gavel sounded like gunshot. "Order, sit down, Mr. Walsh, or I'll hold you in contempt." The prosecutor waited for silence, then asked the question that sealed everything. "Thomas, are you willing to show authorities where Harper is buried?" "Yes, sir. I remember exactly where." 2 days later they found the grave, 15 miles outside Pine Ridge, shallow, hidden, but exactly where Thomas said it would be. Daniel Harper's remains, bullet hole in the sternum. Fragments consistent with a .45 caliber pistol, the kind Walsh carried. The trial resumed November 20th. Walsh's lawyer tried to argue, tried to claim Harper's death was self-defense, that Thomas was lying, that the evidence was circumstantial. Judge Grant listened to 2 hours of arguments, then delivered his verdict. "Thaddeus Walsh, you have been found guilty of child trafficking, conspiracy, fraud, arson, and murder in the first degree. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say?" Walsh stood. For the first time since the trial began, his mask cracked. The respectable sheriff disappeared. What remained was a broken man who'd made terrible choices and destroyed countless lives. "My wife was dying," he said, voice raw. "I needed money. I thought I was helping those children, giving them work, purpose. I never meant—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth. I'm sorry." Grant's expression didn't soften. "Your apology comes too late and means too little. 63 children, 55 sold into slavery, at least 11 dead. Daniel Harper murdered to protect your crimes. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. Deputy Frank Carson received 25 years. Mrs. Constance Porter 15 years with possibility of parole after 10 for her cooperation. Justice had been served. 1 year later. October 15, 1890, Timber Creek Ranch. The new hay barn stood twice the size of the old one, rebuilt with money from insurance and donations that poured in after the trial. People from across Montana sending what they could to the man who'd protected orphans, who'd fought corruption, who'd reminded them that good could still win. The ranch had changed in other ways, too. 8 new ranch hands. 5 of them children who'd been rescued, who'd healed enough to work, who'd chosen to stay because Timber Creek felt like home. Thomas Matthews, Jr. was foreman in training, working alongside Marcus, learning to manage a ranch, planning to buy his own land someday, but in no hurry to leave family. Inside the main house, the changes were even more profound. Sarah and Emma's room had been transformed. No longer a shrine to the dead, but a living space for Grace and Annie. The walls held new pictures, the girls' drawings, Grace's song lyrics, Annie's attempts at writing her name. But Sarah and Emma's photographs now hung in the main room, above the fireplace, where everyone could see them, where their memory lived not as pain, but as love that had been and would always be. Jake stood in his study, looking at those photographs, at Sarah's smile, Emma's laugh. "They'd love what we've built here," he said to Marcus, who leaned against the doorframe. "Sarah always wanted a house full of children. Emma wanted brothers and sisters. You gave them that. Different children, maybe, but family all the same." Jake nodded, turned from the past to the present. "Rose says dinner's ready. You coming?" "Wouldn't miss it." They walked to the dining room. The table had been extended twice to fit everyone. Jake at the head, Rose to his right, Danny to his left, looking more like a young man every day. Grace and Annie across from them, Benji beside Grace, Thomas next to Danny, Marcus at the far end. 10 people who'd been strangers a year ago, who'd become family through choice and struggle and love that refused to quit. Rose brought out the main course: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread with honey, the kind of meal that made men grateful to be alive. They ate, talked, laughed. Annie told a story about the chickens that made no sense, but everyone laughed anyway. Grace sang a new song she'd written. Benji spoke in full sentences now. Talked about a book he'd read, about wanting to become a veterinarian someday, to help animals the way Molly had helped him. When the meal ended and the dishes were cleared, Jake stood, raised his glass of water. The room went quiet. "1 year ago," he said, "a 12-year-old girl hit a deputy with a copper pot." He smiled at Rose. "Not my finest moment to witness. But what came after?" His voice caught. "What came after saved me." He looked around the table, at each face. "Danny, you taught me that being a father means trusting boys to become men. Grace, you reminded me that joy can exist even in sorrow. Benji, you showed me that healing happens in its own time. Annie, you proved that love doesn't need words to be real." He turned to Thomas. "And you reminded me that family can be found even after it's lost." His gaze settled on Rose. You were the bravest of all. You fought when fighting seemed impossible. You protected your family when no one else would. You rode into danger to save children you'd never met. You changed everything." Tears streamed down his face. He didn't bother hiding them. "I spent 7 years thinking my life was over. That losing Sarah and Emma meant losing everything that mattered. I was wrong. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. About showing up every day and choosing to love even when love means risk. Even when it means pain. Because the alternative is dying while you're still breathing." He raised his glass higher. "To family, to second chances, to the girl with a copper pot who saved us all." "To family," everyone echoed. They drank. Then Rose stood, walked to Jake, wrapped her arms around him. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." The room dissolved into hugs and tears, happy ones, the kind that washed clean instead of drowning. Later, after the younger children had gone to bed and the house grew quiet, Jake sat on the porch, looking at stars that had witnessed everything, all the pain, all the healing, all the impossible, beautiful transformation of broken pieces into something whole. Rose found him there, sat beside him without speaking. Sometimes silence said more than words. Finally, Jake spoke. "You know what I'm grateful for?" "What?" "That day in Pine Ridge, when I could have ridden past, could have told myself it wasn't my problem. I'm grateful I didn't." "Me too, Papa. Me too." They sat in comfortable quiet, father and daughter, not by birth, but by everything that mattered. Inside, a clock chimed midnight. Outside, Montana spread vast and dark and full of possibility. And on Timber Creek Ranch, a family slept, safe, together, home. The story could have ended there, would have been enough. But life kept going. Years piled on years. Children grew. The ranch prospered. Rose became a renowned chef, published her mother's cookbook, used the profits to establish a cooking school for orphan girls, teaching them skills that would let them earn their own way, choose their own futures. Danny inherited the ranch when Jake grew too old to manage it, ran it with the same fairness and strength his father had taught him. Married, had 4 children who called Jake Grandpa, and filled the house with noise and life. Grace's choir performed at President Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration in 1905. She married a piano teacher, had 3 children, spent her life bringing music to places that had forgotten how to sing. Benji became Montana's first veterinarian of orphan descent, opened a practice in Missoula, treated animals with the same gentleness Molly had shown him, died at 83 surrounded by children and grandchildren and horses who knew his touch. Annie married Thomas Matthews, Jr., united two branches of a family that had been torn apart and stitched back together. They had 6 children, 17 grandchildren, a legacy of love that spread across Montana like wildflowers. And Jake. Jake lived to be 82 years old, died in his sleep on a winter morning in 1929, surrounded by 17 grandchildren and the ghosts of everyone he'd loved. His last words were to a nurse who asked if he needed anything. "Tell them I kept them safe," he whispered. "Tell Sarah and Emma. Tell them I kept the promise." Then he closed his eyes, let go, went to wherever good men go when their work is done. They buried him between Sarah and Emma, 3 graves under Montana sky. A family reunited at last. On his headstone, they carved words Rose had chosen. Jacob Brennan, 1847 to 1929. Beloved husband, devoted father. He chose love when loss seemed easier. He chose family when loneliness felt safer. He chose to live when merely existing would have hurt less. His broken pieces became the foundation on which others built their lives. And every year, on October 15th, the family gathered. All of them, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, gathered at Timber Creek Ranch to remember. To tell the story of a 12-year-old girl with a copper pot, a broken man who learned to live again, and 5 orphans who found home in the last place they expected. A story about family, not the kind you're born into, the kind you choose, the kind that saves you when you're brave enough to let it, the kind that lasts forever.